Breaking news, FBI and IC raid cartel in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. 3.8 tons of $4.1 million seized.
Eliminate and eradicate entire drug trafficking networks. We're going to clean out whole neighborhoods, and we're going to return these neighborhoods to...
What if the largest criminal infiltration in modern American history unfolded in silence while families slept, communities trusted, and elected leaders insisted everything was under control? What if the most dangerous threat to national security did not cross the border under darkness, but grew quietly in towns that believed they were safe? In 2025, as President Donald Trump publicly warned that domestic infiltration posed a greater threat than foreign adversaries, a chilling reality emerged across Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, an invisible war already underway. Reuters and BBC both noted rising disappearances across rural America during the past year, but none expected the scale soon uncovered entire communities losing people without a trace, trucks moving in synchronized patterns, and an underground network so precise it resembled a military operation. How could this spread so widely before anyone sounded the alarm? The first signs were small: an Ohio farmer missing after a night shift, a teenager vanishing outside a gas station in West Virginia, a nurse in Pennsylvania failing to return home after work. But the pattern grew at a pace investigators had not seen since the cartel wars of the early 2000s. Over 14 months, more than 2,000 men, women, and teenagers disappeared across the 3 states. At the same time, 6,300 drug-related arrests surfaced with an unsettling consistency: same trafficking corridors, same stash houses, same coded communication. Federal analysts from DHS compared the pattern to a shadow superhighway, a term echoed by The Guardian, as reports emerged of fentanyl saturating the American interior faster than border states could respond. Behind the numbers was a network no longer behaving like a cartel, but like an organized state. Known only as the Crimson Raven Cartel, it operated not as a loose collection of smugglers, but as an engineered empire, moving narcotics, trafficking victims, laundering money, and erasing witnesses with stunning efficiency. Intelligence pulled from Jane's and Defense News confirmed that the group used military-grade counter-surveillance tactics, thermal blockers, encrypted radios, timed convoy movements, drones sweeping rural terrain before every shipment. This was not improvisation, this was training. Federal trackers soon noticed something disturbing. No matter where agents deployed, cartel convoys slipped away minutes before raids. Safe houses emptied too fast. Intercepted calls hinted at advance warnings. Local police databases showed unauthorized access. Someone with authority, someone with reach was tipping them off. DW reported that corruption levels inside certain state agencies had raised suspicions as early as late 2024, but no one expected infiltration to run this deep. The cartel's mobility relied on American infrastructure itself. Farms, trucking companies, abandoned mines, even charity centers became nodes in a lattice designed to hide narcotics and people in plain sight. Trucks carrying fentanyl and trafficking victims moved along rural back roads that BBC described as perfect blind zones, areas with low patrol density and limited camera coverage. Every corridor fed into the Great Lakes region, granting the cartel a strategic advantage: the ability to pivot shipments without crossing international borders. For Washington, the implications were devastating. If a cartel could operate on American soil with this level of sophistication, what did it mean for national security, and how many institutions had already been compromised? Communities felt the pressure long before the truth surfaced. In West Virginia, search parties combed through forests for missing residents. In Pennsylvania, families posted flyers on church doors and hardware stores. Fear spread quietly, neighbors locking doors, earlier children escorted to school by parents, elderly residents refusing to walk outside after dark. The haunting question circulated in diners and volunteer halls: where are the missing going? As the trail grew darker, a more chilling realization followed. The disappearances were not random. Investigators mapped them and found they aligned perfectly with the cartel's logistics routes. People vanished, not because they were targets, but because they crossed paths with a machine that needed secrecy above all else. Anyone who saw a shipment, a warehouse, a familiar face in the wrong place simply disappeared. Reuters analysts called it industrialized silence. And yet the stakes extended far beyond local tragedy. America's credibility, its ability to police its own territory, was now in question. If criminal networks could build parallel systems inside U.S. borders, would foreign rivals interpret this as weakness? Could Washington defend its global standing while its interior security cracked open? These were the fears quietly circulating through federal briefing rooms. But the deepest question emerged from the communities themselves. If this level of infiltration could grow unnoticed here, where else in America is it already taking root? The moment investigators realized the cartel always stayed one step ahead, a chilling possibility emerged. What if the threat did not lurk in the shadows, but sat in government offices, wore official badges, and controlled public institutions? As President Donald Trump warned in early 2025, that rot from within is more dangerous than enemies abroad. Federal analysts reviewing the Crimson Raven case began to see the same disturbing pattern: raids failing too early, suspects vanishing too cleanly, and entire trafficking routes staying open as if someone powerful had cleared the road. Reuters described it as precision corruption, the kind that requires influence, not luck. That influence had a name. Gregory Halston, 52 years old, governor of Ohio, a man elected to protect the very communities the cartel was tearing apart, a man secretly serving as their shield. Documents extracted from seized devices revealed the truth. Halston was not merely accepting bribes, he was coordinating the cartel's U.S. operations. Encrypted messages detailed how he redirected patrol units away from cartel warehouses, leaked federal task force plans, and buried investigations into violent cartel activity that had left officers and civilians injured. Al Jazeera noted the pattern matched political criminal collusion seen in foreign states, except this time it was happening in the middle of America. The deeper investigators dug, the worse it became. 17 wire transfers traced through Mexican shell companies, properties purchased under relatives' names along key trafficking corridors, a chain of dual payroll officers, 12 police chiefs, 4 deputy directors, and 39 officers receiving both state salaries and cartel cash. DW wrote that the scale resembled a parallel government one where public offices quietly served criminal goals. In Halston's case, the betrayal was not ideological but operational. Every missing person, every failed raid, every truck that slipped across county lines, all of it was shaped by a governor who had transformed his office into a command hub for organized crime. As news agencies began piecing together the timeline, one detail stood out across BBC, Reuters, and The Guardian's reporting the exact same 12 months in which Halston obstructed investigations were the months that saw over 2,000 disappearances and 6,300 cartel-linked arrests. For families searching for their loved ones, this revelation felt like a blow to the chest. The state they had trusted had facilitated the nightmare they feared. In Columbus, sealed briefings revealed that Halston's corruption penetrated even deeper. State contracting offices showed millions diverted through fake infrastructure projects. Local courts dismissed trafficking charges in suspicious rulings. Emergency response units redirected from neighborhoods moments before cartel convoys passed through. The parallels with previous failed states studied in Jane's Defense Weekly were unmistakable. Once state systems begin coordinating with criminal networks, collapse is no longer theoretical. It becomes inevitable. Strategically, the implications were severe. For Washington, it signaled that America's enemies no longer needed to infiltrate from abroad. They could grow inside the Republic's own institutions. A single governor had compromised 3 states. What would happen if similar networks grew in border corridors, industrial hubs, or ports of entry? As Trump's national security team warned, domestic infiltration threatened not just public safety, but America's global prestige. If the United States could not secure its own interior, how could it project stability abroad? But the human impact cut even deeper. In rural towns where sheriffs trusted Halston's appointees, volunteers realized that their missing children had vanished under a system designed to protect the criminals responsible. In Pennsylvania, parents gathered outside a shuttered youth center, one secretly used as a trafficking hub, staring at ID cards and children's clothing left behind. The betrayal was no longer political, it was personal. By the time federal officials prepared their next move, one truth had settled across every investigative unit: if a governor could be bought, then no state in America was safe. And the question echoing across law enforcement became unavoidable. How many more leaders across the country are already compromised, and who will expose them before the next community falls? What happens when a government discovers that an entire region has been infiltrated, its institutions compromised, and its communities targeted from within? In early 2025, after Governor Gregory Halston's betrayal was exposed, federal commanders issued a single directive echoed by BBC and Reuters analysts: move now or lose everything. If the Crimson Raven cartel sensed danger, its leaders would scatter, its victims would vanish forever, its roots would disappear like smoke. And so, in a moment described by Defense News as a domestic operation, executed with the precision of a wartime assault, Washington launched a strike unlike anything seen on US soil in decades. 4:30 a.m., 3 states. Helicopters slicing through the darkness. Armored convoys rolling out like shadowed steel. The night erupted. This was Operation Red Harvest, a rapid shock-focused strike designed to hit the cartel so fast that no insider, no corrupt officer, and no political shield could warn them in time. The Guardian called it the largest synchronized anti-cartel raid in modern US history, a moment when federal agencies moved with the unity of a single machine. President Donald Trump had authorized aggressive federal coordination only hours earlier, insisting that America must retake control of its interior. In the first minutes, thermal drones lit up fields, rooftops, and rural safe houses with bright silhouettes. Cartel guards scrambled confused, half-dressed radios, crackling with panic. But it was already too late. Federal shock teams were in motion. The first breach hit a warehouse outside Columbus. A steel ram shattered the doors. Flashbangs exploded in blinding bursts that echoed across the concrete. Agents stormed in shouting commands, pinning suspects, clearing corridors. 27 cartel members were subdued before a single shot could be fired back. Defense News reported that the warehouse layout matched standard Sinaloa conversion sites, further confirming the cartel's ties to Mexican command structures. In West Virginia, squads descended into abandoned coal tunnels, labyrinths repurposed as trafficking chambers. The air was thick metallic trembling with distant booms from above. Using infrared scopes, agents uncovered hidden rooms stacked with fentanyl bricks, personal belongings of missing victims, and evidence of human trafficking. Al Jazeera described the scene as a graveyard of stolen lives. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania erupted. A convoy of cartel trucks tried to escape a rural depot at dawn. Engines roared, sirens crackled, but federal units had positioned spike strips in advance. Tires, shredded engines failed, and armored vehicles boxed the fugitives in like closing jaws. Drivers were dragged out, radios seized, weapons kicked aside on cracked asphalt as agents contained the chaos. By 4:51 a.m., the first wave ended. The numbers were staggering. 34 cartel sites hit, 72 arrests, 3.8 tons of narcotics seized, 120,000 fentanyl pills recovered, 187 firearms confiscated, $4.1 million in cartel cash seized. These figures, later confirmed across Reuters and DW reports, represented the largest three-state drug takedown in US history. Yet the most chilling discovery emerged from Ohio, inside a fortified storage facility tied to Halston's hidden properties. Agents uncovered documents outlining a planned expansion into 6 more states. A blueprint for a broader, more aggressive infiltration, a quiet conquest of America's interior. Strategically, the implications were explosive. As Jane's Defense Weekly noted, this operation proved a bitter truth. America's greatest vulnerabilities lie not at its borders, but in the corridors of power corrupted from within. If a cartel could wield state-level influence, redirect patrols, purchase infrastructure, and operate parallel logistics across multiple regions, then traditional law enforcement frameworks were no longer adequate. The US needed counter-organized crime strategies resembling military doctrines, surveillance nets, interdiction corridors, and rapid deployment units already practiced in Trump's national security directives. But human lives remained at the core of this operation. In rural towns, parents woke to news alerts announcing the raids. Some wept relief mixed with horror. Others feared what investigators might find in the aftermath. Volunteers who had searched for missing neighbors now understood the cruel truth: their efforts had been sabotaged by people sworn to protect them. Operation Red Harvest struck the cartel hard, but as dawn broke, another question rose with the sun. If this was only the first wave, how far would the fight need to go to reclaim America's security and its integrity? What happens to a community when the enemy isn't hiding in the shadows but standing in its police stations, sitting in its courts, and governing from its highest elected office? As dawn broke after Operation Red Harvest, the gunfire quieted, but the psychological blast wave had only begun. Across Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, families awoke to breaking headlines that felt like a second strike. Their institutions had been compromised, their trust weaponized, their safety sold. Reuters called it a morning of national disbelief, while DW described it as a rupture in the American social contract. Radio stations were the first to carry the news. By 7:15 a.m., diners, truck stops, and church parking lots echoed the same stunned question. How long had Governor Gregory Halston been helping the Crimson Raven cartel? For many, the answer came with a punch to the gut. The same year that saw over 2,000 disappearances and 6,300 cartel-linked arrests was the exact period in which Halston's office redirected state patrols, erased complaints, and blocked investigations searching for missing children and trafficked victims. In Wheeling, West Virginia, volunteers who had spent months organizing search parties gathered in silence. Some stared blankly at their coffee. Others cried as local reports confirmed that their efforts had been sabotaged by officials who should have led the search. According to BBC's regional coverage, grief turned to fury within hours. Farther north in Pennsylvania, residents lined the streets outside a youth outreach center raided earlier that morning. Inside, investigators had found children's clothing ID cards and traces of fentanyl evidence that the facility had been a trafficking hub disguised as a charity. Parents stood motionless, hands over mouths, eyes shaking. Betrayal was no longer abstract, it was physical. It had a location, a timeline, and the fingerprints of elected authorities on its walls. By mid-morning, protests erupted, not chaotic riots, but quiet, sharpened demonstrations. Seniors stood with signs that read, "Protect our kids and stop selling our communities." Veterans raised American flags, wrapped with black tape along the bottom, a symbol of mourning for the uniforms corrupted by cartel pay. The Guardian wrote that these protests carried the weight of generational memory, especially among Americans over 60 who had lived through the dark waves of crime in the 1980s and the corruption scandals of the 1990s. For many, this moment felt familiar, yet heavier. This time, the danger hadn't come from gangs overpowering the streets. It came from leaders eroding the foundation of trust. Inside police precincts, officers watched the televised reports with trembling hands. In one Ohio station, two retired sheriffs sat side by side, expressionless as names of corrupted chiefs and deputies flashed across the screen. "We taught them to serve," one officer muttered to reporters, "and they turned on their own people." BBC later described the mood among law enforcement as a mixture of shame, anger, and relief that truth had finally surfaced. Meanwhile, federal analysis teams dug deeper into seized files. What they found intensified public shock. The cartel's infiltration extended into emergency response teams, state contracting offices, and even local courts. Entire neighborhoods now visible on DHS vulnerability maps had been left unprotected on purpose. Halston's network crafted blind zones where the cartel could operate freely, shipping fentanyl and abducting civilians without interference. Strategically, the implications reverberated through Washington. As Jane's Defense Weekly reported, the situation revealed a profound vulnerability within American governance. The enemy no longer needed to breach borders when corruption could open the gates from the inside. President Donald Trump's security advisors warned that such infiltration risked undermining American prestige abroad. If domestic institutions faltered, foreign adversaries from hostile states to transnational criminal organizations would see opportunity in the fracture. But beyond politics, the emotional impact was overwhelming. For families who had trusted their state government, the realization felt like a slow collapse from within. The betrayal had been layered, deliberate, and devastating. The people who vanished weren't just victims, they were casualties of a system that failed them twice, once when they were taken, and again when their leaders covered it up. And as the morning sun rose over the Ohio River Valley, one truth settled across the region: the raids were not the end, they were the beginning. Communities were no longer asking how the cartel operated, they were asking how many of their leaders helped make it possible. So as America confronted the scale of this internal fracture, a new question emerged, one that echoed louder than any protest. If corruption this deep could take root here, where else across the country is trust already breaking? And will citizens speak up before silence becomes the next weapon used against them? What happens when a nation realizes the enemy has not only infiltrated its neighborhoods, but its police stations, courts, and state offices? After the shock of Operation Red Harvest, federal authorities confronted a grim reality. The Crimson Raven cartel had survived, not because it was strong, but because America's own institutions had protected it. As President Donald Trump's security advisors warned in briefings reported by Reuters and DW, the next phase would be the most painful, cutting corruption out from inside the Republic's own walls. At 5:04 a.m., unmarked federal vans rolled toward police administration buildings in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. No sirens, no headlights, no warnings. Inside each van were federal warrants sealed under emergency authority. The mission was simple but brutal: identify every badge office and courtroom the cartel had corrupted and dismantle it. The first takedown occurred at the Ohio State Police Administration building. 3 commanders and 2 deputy directors were taken into custody without resistance. Their offices were sealed, their computers confiscated, their internal servers mirrored for forensic analysis. BBC described the moment as a quiet purge carried out with surgical precision. Minutes later, teams raided a suburban Pennsylvania police station, detaining officers once responsible for anti-drug operations. Their crime was not incompetence, it was betrayal. They had repeatedly warned cartel scouts of federal movements, allowing safe houses to empty before raids. A DHS drone captured one arrest from above, officers walking past their own patrol cars in handcuffs, badges removed, eyes lowered, a scene that spread across national media by noon. The arrest count climbed quickly: 56 corrupt officers across 3 states in the first wave alone. Yet Operation Black Lantern was far from over. Inside federal financial crime labs, analysts worked through the night. What emerged stunned even veteran investigators. More than 900 flagged accounts revealed a money laundering network disguised as state payroll entries. Training bonuses, emergency overtime equipment, reimbursements, all funneled from shell companies in Texas, Arizona, Belize, and Sinaloa. Some officers had been receiving 2 salaries for 3 years, one from the state, one from the cartel. Worse still, forensic auditors uncovered that Governor Gregory Halston's office had quietly approved $28 million in fake infrastructure contracts, routing taxpayer money to non-existent companies. The funds ultimately landed in cartel-controlled accounts. The Guardian described it as co-governance between a U.S. state and a criminal empire, a phrase that echoed across national broadcasts as analysts compared the scandal to corruption crises previously seen only in foreign states. The rot extended beyond law enforcement. 2 judges in Ohio and 1 in West Virginia were arrested after investigators uncovered rulings that dismissed trafficking charges in exchange for cartel payments. One judge had freed a Crimson Raven lieutenant just 6 months earlier, an act that enabled the expansion of the same network that later targeted thousands across the 3 states. For older Americans, especially those who lived through the cartel wars of the 1980s, Operation Black Lantern triggered memories of past eras when corruption hollowed out public trust. But as DW noted, this time the scale was larger, the stakes heavier, the infiltration more engineered. America wasn't simply fighting criminals, it was fighting a system that had quietly fused criminal power with political authority. Strategically, Washington recognized the danger. If a cartel could corrupt this many institutions in peacetime, what would foreign adversaries learn from America's vulnerability? Jane's defense. Weekly reported that national security planners feared adversarial states would see the scandal as a sign that the U.S. interior could be destabilized without firing a shot. Trump's advisors stressed that restoring internal legitimacy was now a global security imperative. On the streets, reactions were divided: relief at the arrests, rage at the betrayal. In Wheeling, Charleston, and Pittsburgh, citizens gathered outside federal buildings holding American flags and signs reading "Clean the badge and finish the job." For many, the purge felt like salvation, but also a reminder of how easily trust can break. By the 4th dawn after the raids, a new silence settled across the region. The corrupted officers were processed. Halston's network had collapsed like rotted wood, but inside the Louisville Command Center, no one felt victory, because one line on the operations board remained empty. Status: Crimson Raven leadership unknown. The cartel's financial chiefs, coordinators, and American Command Corps had vanished. They had adapted, slipped away, repositioned. Washington feared they were already preparing a new foothold. And so a darker question emerged, one now whispered inside federal war rooms. If the cartel survived the purge, how long before it strikes back, and will America be ready when it does? What if the most dangerous moment in a war is not the first strike, but the silence that follows? 4 days after the sweeping arrests of Operation Black Lantern, a heavy stillness settled across Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Evidence hangars were full. Court warrants were signed. Corrupted officers were processed. Governor Gregory Halston's criminal empire had collapsed. Yet inside the Louisville Federal Command Center, no one celebrated, because one terrifying truth glowed on the operations board, untouched and unresolved Crimson Raven leadership location unknown. Then at 6:41 a.m. that silence broke. A DHS analyst monitoring satellite feeds across the Great Lakes noticed something moving across Lake Erie, 3 vessels gliding in unnatural formation. No transponders, no commercial IDs, no lights. They violated every maritime regulation. Initial assumptions pointed to smuggling boats, but as resolution sharpened, federal rooms fell into a cold collective stillness. These were not fishing boats, not pleasure craft, not commercial barges. They were modified cargo vessels stripped for speed, reinforced for weight, repainted to evade detection. Maritime shadows designed for one purpose: moving people and product across state lines without being seen. Reuters later confirmed these vessels resembled the same designs used by high-tier criminal logistics cells in northern Mexico. Minutes later, encrypted radio chatter was intercepted. 2 words repeated like a coded omen: Raven rebirth. Crimson Raven wasn't dying, it was reorganizing. Maps lit up inside Homeland Security command rooms, strange cargo movements near the Canadian border, encrypted signals bouncing off cellular towers in Toledo, missing cartel trucks resurfacing in eastern Michigan, unmarked security teams guarding abandoned factories around Detroit's outer ring. BBC analysts reviewing the data noticed a chilling pattern. The cartel was shifting from Appalachian corridors to the Great Lakes, one of the hardest regions in America to monitor. A senior DHS commander leaned over the table and delivered the assessment no one wanted to hear. They're not retreating, they're migrating. At 7:12 a.m., Washington issued a sealed directive: no press, no public acknowledgement, no leaks. Redeploy units. Reinforce the northern border. Prepare for cartel reformation. Coast Guard interdiction teams move quietly across the Great Lakes. FBI hostage rescue units flew into Michigan under civilian cover. Homeland Security activated its least known branch, the Northern Border Response Group, a unit typically reserved for counter-espionage and transnational threats. The entire war shifted north in a single morning. Strategically, the implications were enormous. Jane's Defense Weekly warned that criminal networks often follow the logic of insurgencies: when cornered, they don't collapse, they mutate. The Guardian echoed the concern, noting that the Great Lakes' vast waterways, shipping lanes, and border complexity offered the perfect terrain for a cartel rebuilding its command structure. If Crimson Raven could re-establish itself there, it would gain access to cross-border trade routes, ports with high-volume cargo, rural blind zones with sparse surveillance, multiple state jurisdictions to exploit. President Donald Trump's security advisors described it bluntly: this is no longer a regional problem, this is a national security front. But beyond the strategy and intelligence grids lay the human cost, the weight felt by families who had not yet found their missing, by towns still reeling from betrayal, by seniors who remembered crime waves from decades past. The fear was not the boats nor the encrypted chatter. It was the knowledge that the cartel had survived the purge, that somewhere its commanders had slipped through American fingers, that the quiet North now hid the echoes of a darker future. As dust settled over Lake Erie, the water moved with an uneasy stillness. Not fear, not panic, but anticipation, the sense of a storm forming beyond the border. A new front, a new battlefield, a criminal network evolving faster than the systems designed to stop it. And so the question haunting federal war rooms spread to every community touched by the cartel's shadow. If Crimson Raven can adapt this quickly, how many more shapes will it take, and will America recognize the next one before it's too late? The Crimson Raven investigation revealed the largest internal infiltration in recent American history. Over 14 months, more than 2,000 people vanished across Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, while 6,300 drug-related arrests exposed an expanding cartel empire operating through farms, trucking companies, abandoned mines, and charity centers. The discovery of Governor Gregory Halston's direct involvement shattered public trust. He had redirected patrols, leaked federal intelligence, and funneled state money into cartel accounts. Operation Red Harvest struck back with the largest synchronized anti-cartel raid in modern U.S. history, seizing 3.8 tons of narcotics, 120,000 fentanyl pills, 187 firearms, and millions in cash. But the aftermath revealed deeper corruption, 56 officers, judges, and state officials arrested, and $28 million in fraudulent contracts tied to cartel operations. As Operation Black Lantern purged the system, a new threat emerged. Cartel leadership escaped and began regrouping across the Great Lakes. Modified vessels, encrypted communications, and coordinated movements signaled a shifting war front. Federal agents redeployed north as the cartel migrated toward harder-to-police border corridors. The conflict had not ended, only evolved. The question now is whether America can outpace an enemy that learns, adapts, and resurfaces in silence.